75 to 80 years ago, trains in Germany sent people to gas chambers. And now at that moment, 2015, trains arrived in Germany where Germans would embrace refugees.
German Chancellor Angela Merkel is stepping down as head of her party, and she won't be seeking re-election.
Refugees are welcome here.
Hello and welcome to GZERO World. I'm Ian Bremmer, you knew that, and today I'm going to examine the ultimate cautionary tale about what happens when rising nationalism and signs of a troubled economy combine. Modern-day Germany, like many countries, is again experiencing both. Far-right political parties are growing in influence, blaming immigrants for their country's woes, and even calling on fellow Germans to reconsider their own atonement for Nazi crimes.
The effect, ladies and gentlemen, is quite clear. Young people are systematically brought up to feel guilt and shame about being German.
The rules of German politics are again being rewritten, and the effects are sure to confront not only Germany's next chancellor, Angela Merkel's 14-year reign will soon be kaput, but also the future of Europe itself, from immigration and trade to climate change and the return of ethno-nationalism. And who better to help me sort that out than a man who some think could someday fill Merkel's shoes? He was indeed once considered Germany's chancellor in waiting, and I'm talking about none other than Germany's former defense minister, Karl Theodor zu Guttenberg. Don't worry, I've also got your puppet regime.
Captain Trump, I have had enough of your highly illogical behavior. I am turning in my wings.
But first, a word from the folks who help us keep the lights on. It's been 75 years since the D-Day invasion brought about the beginning of the end for Nazi Germany. It's been 30 since the fall of the Berlin Wall, which, despite lingering divisions between East and West, left Germany with a resurgent economy, a Wirtschaftswunder, making it the most prosperous in Europe. And for the past decade plus, stewardship of that economic engine could be traced back to a woman whom Germans lovingly called Mutti, or mother. That's Angela Merkel. She's twice named by Forbes as the world's second most powerful person behind Vladimir Putin. Merkel has helmed her country and indeed Europe through crisis after crisis. The 2008 financial meltdown, the Greek economic collapse, Eurozone threats, the migrant crisis. But that last one contributed to her undoing. 4 years ago, Chancellor Merkel opened Germany's borders to refugees fleeing war-torn places like Syria and Iraq. Since then, anti-immigrant parties have leapt ahead in the polls, also capitalizing on a West German disconnect with the former communist East, where jobs and prosperity have lagged.
Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
You see, all that Wirtschaftswunder wasn't as wonderful in the East as it was in the West. Since Reunification in 1990, the economy in Eastern Germany has certainly improved, but a 2018 report on German unity found it remains at 75% the strength of Western regions. It's poorer. And 57% of Germans in the East reported feeling like second-class citizens. Only 38% of them surveyed felt that reunification has been a success. And those conditions are creating a ripe environment for the rise of nationalism and right-wing movements. The country's political center has held, but only just. In Brandenburg, the far-right Alternative for Germany, AfD party, effectively doubled its share of the vote. And in Saxony, AfD almost tripled its share to nearly 28%. That's only 5 percentage points behind Merkel's own center-right Christian Democrats. Coalitions have been cobbled together to beat back the AfD's influence, while the Merkel government has reduced asylum applications and ramped up deportations to quell local discontent. But the cat's out of the bag. German politics have grown fractious, with those like Merkel and her successors now having to fend off a new, if not familiar, political influence intent on reviving that old us versus them way of thinking. something that's growing all across the continent. Meanwhile, economic storm clouds are gathering. The latest read is that the German economy is heading towards recession. The reasons are varied, but for starters, Germany is the world's third largest exporter. Its big manufacturing sector relies on steady trading partners. So US-China trade war, Brexit, that all leaves it particularly exposed. And that means Germans will start to feel the pinch just about the same time that a growing political movement is looking for someone to blame.
We are currently, I think, at a tipping point. We need to be just way more innovative where this European Union should lead to in the future.
Delighted to be with Karl Theodor, Guttenberg, former Minister of Economy, former Minister of Defense of Germany. Great to have you on the show.
Lovely to be here.
The German government under Merkel has been a large, fairly centrist government. It's been a grand coalition.
Struggling with the term grand, though.
Yes, and yet very recently we have the Social Democrats coming, who are performing very badly, but saying, actually, no, we're moving away from austerity. We want to start spending a lot more. Is this a short-term, narrow political ploy, or is this a recognition that what's happening in Germany is changing?
A little bit of both. On one hand, they're with the back to the wall. They don't see any perspective any longer. There is that storyline across Europe. Has social democracy or the social democratic idea fulfilled its purpose? Is there a future for that kind of party? I personally hope so. It's a necessary balancing factor we definitely need, but they have to redefine and reinvent, of course, what they stand for. Because if you look at it, we've just had the state elections in the East, and the SPD,
two of them.
Two of them, and the traditional Social Democratic Party, not as traditional in the East, but has been almost pulverized. So they are
pulverized in particular by this new party.
Right.
The Alternatives for Deutschland, the AfD, the Eurosceptics. They always perform better in former East Germany, but still, I think, exceeding the expectations of most. Tell our viewers a little bit about who this new party is.
Well, I could give you the blunt answer and say it's just a bunch of lunatics. And well, yes, they do have a bunch of lunatics among their ranks there, without a question. But it goes a little deeper. It is a group that has analogies to other political parties we have seen being formed across the so-called Western world as a reaction, or somehow as a picture being framed out of sheer despair of voters towards the so-called establishment, connected with a growing nationalism. And that's something, and people would call it populism at the end of the day. I'm a little bit cautious with that term, but easy answers, nationalistic answers tied to those easy answers or combined with it lead to something where you have to put a framework around it, and you call it a party at the end of the day, not only a movement. And that's part of the description for the AfD. Then again, we have to distinguish, Ian, between Eastern and the former Western Germany and the so-called old states of Germany. In the East, you always had, after reunification, a very volatile voting behavior there. It's out of understandable reasons. There have been, for 1.5, 2 generations, been forced into voting a communist party, and suddenly they have the freedom to vote for those who make the most appealing promises, and voters there would shift from the far left to the far right.
Much more easily. Yeah.
Much more easily.
We understand who they are. It makes a lot of sense that you're going to have people that come from rural areas, poorly industrialized areas, are going to be more disenfranchised. Happens in the US, happens all across Europe. What they want, on the other hand, does feel a little bit different, right? Because, I mean, we're not, in Germany, you've got a country that the people generally feel like they benefit from the EU, kind of like in Mexico, they benefit from NAFTA, right? So that wasn't playing when you had the populists there. You don't have the Germans saying we need to rebuild a big military might. So when you talk about German nationalism today, in 2019, what does it feel like? What exercises it? What moves it?
Banal points. Some of them you see in other countries around the globe as well. So one is anti-immigration. certainly now connected and even pushed forward by the immigration and the refugee crisis we have had after the year of 2015. So that's one topic. The other one is a skepticism towards giving up more or less all sovereignty towards the European Union. That skepticism is not based on firm grounds, because not a single European member state has given away every single aspect of its sovereignty. It reflects a deeply grounded kind of let's say, quote, romanticism towards the good old times, without describing it properly. The good old times had their own difficulties.
When were the good old times in Germany?
So for some of them, the good old times were when we still had the Deutschmark and when we were not tied to a euro. Good old times were when we only had to handle a few workers coming from Italy and Turkey to us, helping us with things we wouldn't like to handle ourselves. And so entirely pushing aside to the sidelines the realities and difficulties of those times as well.
When we talk about German nationalism, is there a feeling not just among the fringe, but more broadly, that we've apologized enough? There is no more need for us to be a constrained and abnormal country, and we need to forget about our past?
I strictly oppose that view. I don't think that's true. We have just remembered 80 years of September 1st, 1939, the beginning of World War II, and I've been in Germany last week and during that week as well, and I've talked to many people, and whomever I talk to, regardless whether they're voters of the AfD and others, all of them said that's something we need to remember, and it's something that remains to be a burden, it remains to be a shame, it remains to be something we have to remind next generation that it never ever happens again. So, of course, you do have your 5 to 10% of people who would say, now it's over, and we've done enough, and we've done more than any other nation around the globe, trying to learn our lessons, and we should be back to normal. I think you never can be back to normal entirely.
Now, Merkel is nearing the end of her tenure.
That's what people say.
But what do you think the next leader of Germany, how do you think they're likely to be different from Merkel? What are things that we're going to turn the page on, no matter who it is?
So the next German leader definitely needs to be someone who steps up and tell a European public how he or she would like to see Europe shaped in the future. The next German leader needs to be one who is capable and willing to position Europe with that cascade of ideas then between the US and China. The next German leader needs to be very clear where we will be leaning towards for a German/European future. Is it still the Western alliance, or is it a combination of taking advantages of China being way more active and proactive on the European continent? I think we are well advised to re-establish the transatlantic relationship. Of course, that very much also hinges on who is sitting over here and whether it's someone flip-flopping every single second or whether it's someone also convinced of that relationship. But all the things. And if we have this president over here still in power with the next German leader, we need someone who is equally as Angela Merkel capable of phrasing his or her own opinion, and that with the necessary stamina that's needed.
Tell me what, briefly, you think Merkel's legacy will be. I mean, you know her well. How will she see her legacy?
She's lacking one thing a lot of politicians would see as their driving force for being elected, and that's vanity. And so I'm really not sure how she would like to be seen. I just met her a few days ago again, and it's never, ever about herself. It's about her country, it's about the people. So how will she be seen? I think one major point will be not only first elected woman as German Chancellor, not only the fact that she has probably been in office longer than Helmut Kohl. Those are side aspects. I think one of the main achievements is keeping Germany on a successful road during one of the largest financial crises the globe has seen, and that was an enormous achievement. Keeping Europe together at that very time, although others would say Germany put other European member states at risk, but that was definitely not her goal. She kept the thing together. And then, of course, there'll be critical voices on one hand in respect of how she dealt with the refugee crisis. But there will also others be in the history books who will say, remember one thing. About 80 years ago, 75 to 80 years ago, trains in Germany sent people to gas chambers. And now at that moment, 2015, trains arrived in Germany where Germans would embrace refugees. And that's something where she set a humanitarian example. And yes.
And suffered one of her greatest political defeats.
And suffered one of their greatest political defeats. And of course was almost obliterated even by party members. How could you? And were there mistakes? Absolutely. Was it managed well? Not entirely. But I think there will be some kind of a split reactions amongst historians, split reactions amongst historians, whether she acted highly responsibly, humanitarian, and with an amount of soul and heart you usually don't expect from politicians, or whether she just mismanaged how to deal with it, or the question of how to deal with it. And that's something where I can't tell you the result yet, but I wish that it will be a fair look back. She'll never be seen as someone highly charismatic. She'll never be seen as the most imposing leader, but she'll be seen as someone who was capable of managing day-to-day politics probably more with the best, as we say in German, costume of nerves imaginable around her. She was dealing and juggling all these things very properly. And yes, could she have done a little bit more here and there for problems of the next generation? Maybe, but that's not her style.
Karl Theodor, thank you very much.
Thank you, Ian.
And now for something completely different, I've got your puppet regime.
Come in, Angela. It's Angela. Captain Trump, I have had enough of your highly illogical behavior. I am turning in my wings. Great. You Germans are such freeloaders anyway. Where are you going? Well, there is a new captain in town. Who? What's up, mes amis? L'espace c'est moi. We shall boldly go where no Frenchman has gone before. Where? Winning a war? No, le final frontier. Space. Allons-y, Angela. It's Angela. Jupiter's log. Stardate 7.14.789. Who would ever have thought that a French and a German could soar the cosmos at peace like this? Most unlikely, yeah. But it appears we are going in circles a bit, which is highly illogical. Let me check le navigation. It looks fine. We are navigating based on the position of the sun. Le Soleil, giver of life, master of the galaxy. Yeah, but, Manu, it just looks like the navigation is set to revolve around you. Yes, our soaring galactic destiny awaits. We've lost power. Impossible. The election isn't until 2022. No, Manu, the engines are off. What is going on? No. Check the engine room.
Down with Macron! Down with Macron! Death to the EU! Down with Macron! Public regime!
That's our show this week. We'll be back next week because it's a weekly show. So if you come back, I'll be back. We'll meet right here. Don't miss it. In the meantime, if you like what you've seen, check us out on GZEROmedia.com.